121. Message from a companion. They're fighting at the front door. Herschel's hand trembled on the gun, but he gritted his teeth. We have to hold the back door. We can't let them flank us. There are 4 of them. Louis listened to the noises outside and judged quickly. 2 at the front, 2 at the back, getting ready to rush in. A flash of killing intent crossed Marge's face. She pulled the bolt, ready to charge out and fight. Louis grabbed her arm. Let me. He pulled a small black sphere from his backpack and hissed to Marge and Herschel. This is a homemade flashbang. I don't know how strong it is. Close your eyes. They retreated and shut their eyes. Louis didn't throw the device right away. Instead, he slipped his hand toward the door and whispered as he drew his wand. Lumos. The tip of the wand flickered a few times and produced a weak glow no bigger than a firefly. Louis let out a frustrated sound. This half-baked spell was useless at blinding an enemy. If magic couldn't do it, technology would. He sharpened his focus, then hurled the sphere into the back alley. As it sailed out the door, the hand he had tucked into his sleeve moved subtly. The sphere, which had been following a simple parabola, stalled in the air for a beat, and then, as if pushed, accelerated and smashed down right in front of the 2 men preparing to flank them. What? The 2 turned instinctively. A blinding white light detonated in the narrow alley. Ah, my eyes! Now! Louis shouted. Herschel and Marge slammed the iron door open and fired on the 2 figures, clutching their faces and firing blindly. Gunshots cracked and both attackers dropped. Get back! Watch the roof! Louis didn't go out. His eyes stayed trained on the second-floor building opposite. Marge rolled behind a trash can, ducking a spray of bullets. He's up there. Herschel fired at the roof, forcing the sniper to duck back. At the front door, the gunfire thinned as well. The remaining man realized things were going badly and heard walkers being drawn by the noise. Fear took over. Randall, move! The walkers are coming, he barked and bolted for the car. The sniper on the roof, Randall, panicked too. He glanced at the growing crowd of walkers, then at his fallen comrades, and decided to jump from the second floor to the car roof. But he slipped in his haste. His foot caught and he fell. Ah! He shrieked. One leg slammed into the top of the fence and was pierced by a sharp spike. He dangled on the iron railing like a frog pinned to a board. Help! Help me! He screamed as blood poured down his pant leg. The driver went pale. He looked at Randall, pinned to the fence, and whatever loyalty he had evaporated in an instant. Sorry, brother, he cried and stomped the gas. The car screamed away down the street, disappearing around the corner without looking back. No, don't leave me. Randall reached out and grasped at air. The shooting stopped. Rick stepped out from the bar's front door. A few people formed a loose circle around the young man hanging from the fence. Please, help me, Randall begged. He was sweating from pain, his face young, maybe 17 or 18, twisted with fear. Don't kill me. I don't want to die. For a beat, a flash of pity crossed Rick's face. Now, if this were the old world, he might have pulled him in. But memories surfaced. The young members of the believers in the factory who begged for execution during the judgment, the scout at the gas station who had tricked them. Youth no longer guaranteed innocence. We can't take him with us, Rick said with difficulty, making a cruel decision. It's the right decision. To his surprise, the usually soft-hearted Herschel didn't protest. The old man sighed and patted Rick's shoulder. He tried to kill us, Herschel said simply. You don't have to feel guilty. Rick looked at Randall one last time. We don't kill a captive, he murmured, but I can't take someone who tried to kill us. He turned. Let's go. No, don't go, please, Randall sobbed. He broke down completely and screamed at them. If you leave, I'll die. Don't leave me. Rick's footsteps faltered, but he didn't look back. Instead, he pulled a knife from his belt and tossed it to Randall. This is the last thing I can give you, Rick said. Choose, deal with the walkers or deal with yourself. Just as they started to evacuate in earnest, Marge came rushing up from the alley, panting. Rick, wait. Louis says the intersection ahead is crawling with walkers. We should take another route. Randall's wails cut off so suddenly it was as if someone had grabbed his throat. The next second, he seized onto the halt like a lifeline and began babbling. Rick? Louis? You're Rick and Louis? They ignored him, assuming it was the frantic ramblings of a dying man. Rick even quickened his pace toward the car until Randall shouted something that stopped him in his tracks. That Louis? Is he a blonde kid? Rick froze. He spun, gun leveled at Randall, eyes hard as knives. What did you just say? Help me. I know you guys. Randall yelled, desperate, like a drowning man clutching a scrap of wood. I have news about your companions. He rammed the words out. I know where your companions are. About 5 or 6 of them. They escaped from the Believers. We saved them. What? Rick demanded, staring into Randall's eyes to see if it was a lie. A few seconds later, slowly, Rick lowered his gun and looked at Herschel. We have to get him out. Randall's pleading bought him a temporary reprieve. Marge and Herschel both knew hauling him along would be a huge burden, especially with walkers closing in. But when they saw the spark of hope back in Rick's eyes at the thought of finding their friends, they understood the risk had to be taken. Fine, take him, Herschel sighed. Give me a hand. Arguments died away. Rick and the others rushed to the fence where Randall lay. Herschel checked the wound, his face tight. It's bad. If we try to pull him off the spike, we'll have to tear through muscle to free his leg. That would cause massive bleeding, Marge added. That leg would probably be ruined. He wouldn't be able to walk. It hurts. It hurts so much, Randall wailed. Shut up, Marge snapped, eyes flicking toward the mouth of the alley. You'll draw every walker nearby. Rick stared at the shifting shadows not far off and squared his shoulders. There's no time for surgery. His voice went flat and hard. There's an axe in the car. I'll get it and just chop the leg off so we can take him. What? Randall screamed, panic making the other leg kick desperately. No, please, don't chop my leg off. Then shut your mouth. Rick started to turn for the car, but Walker moans and the sound of feeding had already been drawn to Randall's screams. Walkers were blocking their path. Rick couldn't get back for tools. Damn it, he cursed. Trapped, he looked at Herschel. Herschel, watching the walkers close in, made a decision. Rick, hold him down. I can cut the ligaments below the kneecap with a knife. He'll lose his lower leg, but he'll live. Randall howled. No, don't. Help, as Herschel drew a small, gleaming blade. Whatever you're going to do, you'd better do it fast. Marge shot an approaching walker and called over her shoulder. We're getting surrounded. Hold him down, fast, Herschel barked. We need something to cauterize the wound right after, or he'll bleed out. Just get him out of here. Rick lunged forward to pin Randall. This is the only way. Bear with it. Chaos reigned. Randall screamed, hands and booted feet thrashing, until a muffled thud cut through the noise. The scream he had just started to make choked off. His eyes rolled back, his head slumped, and he went limp. Silence fell hard. Rick and Herschel stared. Louis stood a little way off, inexplicably back from the side, a few stones still in his hand. I think it'll be more convenient this way, he said flatly, tossing the stones aside and rubbing his palms. Rick looked at the unconscious Randall, then at Louis, and let out a long breath. It was easier now. No thrashing, no screams. Good job, he said. No axe, no slow ligament cutting. Rick grabbed Randall's leg with both hands and with a brutal upward yank tore it free from the metal spike. The sound of tearing muscle was sickening. Blood sprayed. Even under the drugged-out pallor of unconsciousness, Randall's body convulsed from the pain. Quick, bandage it, Rick shouted. Herschel was already moving, packing emergency dressings into the ragged hole and staunching the flow of blood. Prop him up, he ordered once the bleeding slowed. Carrying a wounded man slowed them to a crawl. Rick hoisted Randall on his back. Herschel and Louis brought up the middle. Marge covered the rear. They hadn't gone far before a dozen walkers blocked the far end of the alley. Blocked ahead, pursued from behind. Things were looking grim. That way's blocked too, Marge shouted, firing. Her single shots did little against the tide. Yo, look who we got here, a lazy, irritating voice drawled. Ain't this our beloved friendly cop? They turned to see Merle crouched on the wall above the alley, cigarette dangling from his mouth. He dropped down and swung an axe in a vicious arc. A walker about to fall on Rick had its skull split in two. Merle kicked the corpse aside and grinned. Looks like without me, you goody two-shoes can't even cross the street, huh? He sneered at Louis, who stood guarded behind Rick. And you, kid, running around with him at your age? You in a hurry to die, or what? Before he could go on, a walker lunged from the shadows behind him. Behind you, Rick started to warn. A short blade flashed and buried itself in the walker's temple. Andrea stepped out, pulled the blade free, flicked blood from it with a look of disgust, then scanned the group. "You guys okay? Everyone all right?" Merle rubbed the back of his neck, ungrateful. "I smelled it ages ago. Was just gonna smack it down myself," he grumbled at Andrea. "What? Could you not bear the lack of excitement?" A crossbow bolt sang through the air and pinned a walker to the alley wall. Daryl emerged from the other side, crossbow in hand, and gave Merle a hard look. "Give it a rest. If it wasn't for Andrea, you'd have lost a chunk of meat." He pulled another bolt and added, "You're not doing any better. Quit acting the fool." "Whose side are you on, huh? Helping outsiders now?" Merle snapped. Glenn came running up from behind, out of breath and clutching a pistol. "Now's not the time to fight. Save it for later." It turned out the folks back at the camp had noticed Rick and the others hadn't returned and sent a team to find them. With reinforcements on site, the tide turned. They pushed through the walkers, hustled the unconscious Randall into the back of the car, and cleared a path. "Who is he?" Andrea asked as she slid into the driver's seat, eyeing the bloodied leg. Rick closed the car door and wiped his face clean of spattered blood. His gaze hardened. "He's a lead," he said quietly. "He knows Lou's name and has seen some of our missing people. Get him back to the camp. Once he wakes up, we'll find out where the others are." Hearing that, everyone straightened, relief and purpose returning. "Then what are we waiting for?" Daryl said, yanking the car door open. "Home. Then we interrogate him." The night at Herschel's farm was shattered once again by the roar of engines. Two cars, smelling of smoke and blood, tore into the yard. Shane and the others who had stayed behind rushed out with guns at the ready. "It's us!" Glenn yelled from the passenger seat as he leaned out. Carol, Beth, and the rest who had been waiting hurried forward and surrounded the vehicles. When they saw the bloody, unconscious man slumped in the back seat, a collective gasp went up. "Quick, get him inside." Rick didn't have time to explain. He barked orders. "This kid has lost too much blood. If we don't treat him now, he'll die. We need him alive to talk." They scrambled to carry Randall into the barn. Dr. Jenner hurried over when he heard. He ran his hands over Randall's wounds and frowned. "Severe blood loss, extensive lacerations. We need to debride and suture immediately." As he finished speaking, Dr. Jenner swayed. Earlier, while helping reinforce the fence, a rolling log had smashed into his shoulder. The movement had strained it, and now the pain hit him. "Doc, go rest. I'll handle this," Louis said. Without hesitation, Louis shrugged off his coat, rolled up his sleeves, and pushed into the treatment area. He was 10 years old, but he moved with the calm precision of someone far older. Turning to Herschel, he began issuing directions like a lead surgeon. "Mr. Herschel, I need plenty of hot water, alcohol, hemostats, and the best sutures you have. If you don't have medical sutures, boil that roll of fishing line, and light more lamps. I'll need good light." Herschel stared, stunned. This was the first time a child had ordered him around. But he remembered how perfectly Amy's wound had been treated and saw that Dr. Jenner didn't object. He nodded and moved to obey. Soon everything was laid out. "Hold him down," Louis told Herschel. Then, picking up scissors and forceps, he worked quickly to cut away shredded clothing and the mangled tissue clinging to the skin. Blood flowed freely. Louis frowned. "We're low on bandages. Mr. Herschel, get more." Herschel glanced at the spurting wound and dashed for the cabinet. While he was gone, Louis drew out a slim wand and hovered it above Randall's injuries. He whispered one short word, "Episky." The deeper vessels that had been oozing began to clot. Damaged muscle contracted and knit just enough to staunch the worst of the bleeding. He didn't let the wound snap shut in an instant. He limited the effect to aid in hemostasis and to stabilize the deep tissue so the rest of the work could be done properly. Herschel returned, bandages in hand, and leaned in. The old veterinarian's eyes widened. With such horrific trauma, to be able to stop the bleeding this cleanly, Herschel, who had worked for decades, might not have done it so efficiently. He studied Louis closely. Under the lamplight, the boy's face was focused and serious, his hands sure and practiced. He thought of the times the boy had listened to Dr. Jenner and of the rumors that the boy had practiced on walkers outside. Still, the skill he was displaying now was astonishing. Herschel promised himself he'd ask Rick later exactly what the boy had been taught. Lewis snipped the last suture and set the blood-stained tools in a tray. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He wiped it away and let out a long breath as Randall's breathing steadied. A few people who had been lingering in the yard drifted in after hearing the commotion. "He's not going to die," Louis told them while he washed his hands. "But he's lost a lot of blood and is very weak. Someone needs to keep watch tonight. We should watch for a high fever from post-op infection." "Huh," someone added. Louis pointed at the wound. "If a fever sets in and doesn't break, he'll need antibiotics, or it could go badly." "Good work, Louis," Rick said, stepping closer and examining the neatly treated wound. "Go rest. We'll take over." Louis nodded. The most dangerous part was done. There was nothing more for him to do. They had originally planned to interrogate the stranger through the night, but seeing Randall half dead and fearing they might kill him by pushing, they had abandoned that idea. The farm passed the night on rotating watch. The next morning, sunlight shafted through the gaps in the barn, painting the dusty floor in thin lines. A hacking cough cut the quiet. Randall's eyes opened slowly. The first thing he felt was a sharp pain in his leg. He tried to move and found he couldn't. His hands were tied behind him and he was lashed to a chair. "Awake?" a cold voice asked from above. Randall looked up in panic. Faces peered down at him. Rick, Shane, Daryl, their eyes hard and appraising. "Where is this?" he stammered. "Welcome to hell, kid," Merle said with a grin as he leaned close and slapped Randall's cheek. "Sleep well last night? Now let's play a Q&A game." Rick stood nearby and didn't stop Merle's intimidation. He glanced toward the barn door and saw Louis there, a group of children peeking in. Rick frowned. "Louis," he said, "take Carl and the others out." "Okay." Louis's voice was flat. He had no taste for the kind of violence that would follow. He led the children away before the interrogation began. "Come on, help Brother Glenn sort supplies. I heard they brought back a lot of food this time." They moved off, more obedient than curious, unnerved by the barn's heavy atmosphere. They hadn't gone far when a dull thud came from behind the closed doors, quickly followed by Randall's raw screams and pleas. Sophia shrank back, frightened. "What are they doing in there?" Louis smiled, small and composed, and gave her a reassuring shrug. "They're just asking for directions." 124. Ready to strike. Asking for directions. Carl listened to the constant screams coming from inside and raised an eyebrow. "Is he asking which way to hell?" "Maybe he's asking for heaven," Dwayne shrugged. Louis looked at the two kids with a darkening frown. He pulled them a little farther away before correcting them. "Neither. He's calling out the way that will lead us to our missing people." The screaming went on for about 20 minutes and then stopped as abruptly as it had begun. A few minutes later, the door opened and several people walked out. Merle came out, wiping blood from his hands, a look of post-work boredom on his face. "Sk, boring." He tossed the blood-stained towel onto the railing and spat. "Kid's a coward." "I barely used anything," Merle added with a sneer. He was ready to spill his whole life story. Rick followed with a crooked sketch he'd drawn from Randall's confession. "Everyone, gather up," he called. "We need to go over this." The group huddled under the porch and leaned in to look. "The situation's worse than we thought," Rick said, "but at least it's clearer." He spread the sketch on the hood of the pickup and pointed to a spot. "According to Randall, these people have been murdering their way here from Philadelphia. Roughly 30 armed men, mostly young to middle-aged. Count the women and kids, and the whole gang's pretty big," Morales muttered as he peered at the map. "They had a temporary camp about 5 miles out, but a few days ago they moved into a big auto repair shop on the edge of town." Rick's face went harder, like he'd remembered something ugly. Randall said one more thing. He took a breath and told it slowly. "Not long before we met Randall's crew, these bastards cornered a man and his 2 teenage daughters out in the open while they were scavenging." The group's expressions soured. "What did they want?" Jackie asked, her fists clenching. "They wanted to have some fun." Rick's voice went cold. "They were planning to rape the girls and force the father to watch." "Animals," T-Dog growled. "But just as they were about to start," Rick continued, "a group calling themselves the Believers showed up." "The Believers?" Everyone exchanged looks. "Those nuts we cleared out?" Rick nodded. "Yeah, Those believers weren't saints, but they jumped in and clashed with the thugs, maybe trying to recruit, maybe for some other reason. Randall said the believers fought like mad dogs and were well equipped. The thugs didn't want that kind of trouble and were driven off. The father and his daughters slipped away in the chaos, Rick said. If I remember correctly, the man who warned us before, the one who came to tell us about the wolves nearby, that should be the same guy. Merle snorted. Small world. Looks like by knocking out the believers, we might have helped these assholes get rid of competition. Over 30 armed men. Morales frowned at the sketch. That's a lot. What are they? Religious fanatics like the believers? No. Shane shook his head, disgust flickering across his face. These aren't religious. They're thugs. Street gang. No faith, no rules, just survival and plunder. They call themselves the Philadelphia Alliance, but they're just highway robbers with a name, Rick said. Then his voice dropped, and the way they treat the weak is disgusting. According to Randall's account, the Philly group had brutal survival rules. They recruited the able-bodied fighters, anyone willing to join their cruelty. The old, the weak, the sick, and anyone who refused were treated as nothing more than consumables. Consumables? Andrea asked. Live bait, Rick said. Scouts, basically. He pointed to several red X's marked around the auto shop. They've left some buildings around the shop uncleared. They make the weak ones go out unarmed to draw walkers. If the bait draws the walkers, the thugs pick them off and go for supplies. If the bait gets bitten or eaten, he stopped. They just move on to the next one. On top of that, they set brutal scavenging quotas for the surviving non-combatants. Bring back a certain amount of supplies every day. Fail, and you lose a limb or you don't eat. The words hung in the air, heavy as stone. Their missing people were in that hell. If they didn't move fast, there might be nothing left but bodies. We have to go get them, T-Dog said immediately, knuckles cracking as he clenched his hands. Daryl checked his crossbow bolts without expression. So when do we start gutting those pieces of shit? We move tonight, Rick decided. Under cover of darkness, surprise attack. It's an auto shop, lots of metal and cars to use for cover. Count me in. Andrea stepped forward before Rick finished drawing up plans. She gripped her gun tight, voice steady and determined. Daryl snorted and toyed with a bolt in one hand, glancing at her. Give it a rest, Blondie. This ain't target practice. He stared her down. His voice went cold. That's a pack of mad dogs. If a guy gets in their hands, he'll probably just get killed. But if it's a woman, his mouth twisted into a cruel little smile, you wouldn't want to know. Trust me, you'd be praying for a quick death. Andrea didn't flare up. She stepped closer and met Daryl's eyes without wavering. I know what it means. Her voice shook, but only with feeling. The last time, at that believer's factory, I hid out on the farm like a coward and waited for you all. I didn't know who lived or who was dead. That helplessness was worse than anything. She turned to Rick and Shane, heat in her gaze. Shane taught me to shoot. Rick taught me how to survive. I can help. Silence settled for a beat. Shane looked at Andrea, then at Rick. After a long pause, he finally nodded. She's decent with a gun. She can provide covering fire from the perimeter. Rick considered and then agreed. Okay, you stay with the main group. You don't go off on your own. Understood, Andrea said darkly. Rick refocused on the map, beginning to assign teams. We'll split into 2 squads. Shane, you take... I'm going too. A familiar voice cut him off. Everyone turned. Luis had slipped up silently. No one had noticed him join. Shane's face hardened immediately. No. Luis, you're capable and you helped before, Shane said flatly, but this is not negotiable. We're up against a bunch of fully armed, cold-blooded killers. They won't cut you any slack just because you're a kid. Shane's right, Rick nodded. Last time you were with us out of necessity. This time we have guns, numbers, and a plan. You don't have to be out there with us. Louis shook his head. I'm not going to fight this time, he said. I'm only going to scout. If that's true, there's even less reason to keep me back, Louis added. Andrea jumped in to back Rick and Shane. Even if Louis is a good scout, we have detailed intel from Randall now. With everyone here, it's enough. Faced with everyone's objections, Louis didn't back down. He stepped forward and gave an even stronger reason. But I'm a doctor. He looked Rick in the eye. According to Randall, those captured companions could be seriously injured or so weak they can't move. What if someone needs emergency first aid on site? What if someone has massive bleeding that needs immediate treatment? Hey, kid, Shane shot back, pointing toward the house. You're not the only doctor on this farm. Then do you want Dr. Jenna, who can make the serum, to risk his life out there with you? Louis countered. Or do you want Mr. Herschel, who's been exhausted all day, to drag his old body into a high-intensity raid? Everyone fell silent. Shane still refused to budge. I'm not letting you go. If this goes south, no one goes, he said. He tried a gentler tack. If those people are seriously hurt, there's a good chance we can't save them anyway. If they're only lightly injured, we can bring them back. There's no reason to sacrifice yourself. But what if there are seriously injured people, like Randall, who need an on-the-spot amputation or someone to stop the bleeding before they can be moved? Louis pressed. Are you just going to watch them die on the way back? Louis demanded. Shane was momentarily at a loss for words, but he planted himself in Louis's path and wouldn't let him pass. No one else spoke. Deep down, most of them agreed with Shane. They would rather risk a failed rescue than let this hope take the danger. Just then, a lazy voice cut the stalemate. Merle, who had been leaning against a pillar watching, picked at his ear and spoke up. This kid's smarter than you think. Last time, that damn Believer's factory, he even managed to pull my idiot brother out. He glanced at Louis, a crooked smile on his face. As long as he doesn't run up front, he'll survive no problem. And besides, Merle added with a grin, with a kid who can stitch wounds along, if I get shot, I might bleed a little less, right? Everyone was reminded. Louis had already proved he was no ordinary kid. His survival skills had outmatched some adults. Most importantly, Merle sneered, Stop acting like overprotective parents. He leaned back against the pillar and looked from Shane to Rick. When this kid made up his mind before, did any of you actually stop him? In Atlanta, at the factory, when did he ever not make his own decisions? The awkward silence that followed made the truth unavoidable. Rick sighed and compromised. Fine, he told Louis. You can go. Shane wanted to argue, but Rick's glare shut him up. Rick crouched down to Louis and warned him in a tone heavier than usual. You must obey orders without question. Stay behind us at all times. Once the shooting starts, find cover immediately. You must not charge the front. Understand? Understood, Louis said, smiling. As long as he could go, nothing else mattered. Very well, Rick nodded. Meeting dismissed. Get ready. The group broke up to check weapons and ammunition. Louis turned to pack his medical kit when a hand caught his arm. Don't leave yet, Rick said behind him, voice low and carrying an unusual weight. We need to talk. Rick pulled him into the shadows away from the other's eyes. He lowered his voice, anxiety clear. You know what Dr. Jenna told me. Louis met his gaze. You were using the doctor line as a reason to go, but we both know there might be more. If there's a cure in this world, you could be the source. Rick's words hung between them. He exhaled. I don't want to say this, but you have to understand. Your life is more important than all of ours. Whether for yourself or for others, Rick continued, you can't take unnecessary risks. That's exactly why I have to adapt to this place as fast as possible, Rick. Louis didn't look away. He took a step closer. Because I'm special, I have to be able to protect myself. Isn't that right? You can protect people for a while, but not forever, Rick replied. Even if I stay with you, there will be times you can't watch my back. Don't change the subject. Rick frowned. Skills can be learned. We can teach you to shoot, to fight, here at the farm, but that's not the same as you going on a raid tonight. How is it not related? Louis shot back. Actual combat is the best teacher, and I'm only going to handle the rescue work this time. Nothing will happen. You know what I mean. Rick's voice rose with frustration before he forced it down. I know you want to help. I know you're kind and want to save people, but that's an adult's burden. You don't have to save everyone. Those people aren't your responsibility. Louis looked at Rick, whose face was marked by fatigue and a brittle kind of resolve. Then why are you risking so much to go after those deserters who abandoned us in the first place? He asked. Rick was silent for a long moment. Finally, he answered, voice rough. Because we haven't given up on being human. He glanced toward their companions' organizing gear. If we just stand by and watch people die, if we become cold because others once did wrong, Then what's the difference between us and those walkers out there, or those thugs? Me too, Louis said quietly. If I were an ordinary kid who knew nothing, that'd be one thing. But I know medicine. I have the ability. If I stayed home and watched them die on the way back because they didn't get timely treatment, I couldn't live with myself. Take me with you, Rick. He met Rick's eyes. We're on the same side. Rick sighed and gave a helpless, tired smile. Sometimes I really wish you weren't so stubborn. Likewise, Louis said. I wish you wouldn't worry so much. Rick let out a humorless chuckle and pulled him into a firm hug. Stay close to me, he whispered in Louis's ear. Don't make me regret this. Yes, officer. When Rick stepped away, Louis let out a breath that tasted like relief. Everything had gone according to plan. 126. Reclaim your companions. The earlier talk about saving people hadn't been nonsense. If there were wounded, he could treat them along the way. But the most important thing was that Louis wanted to see if he could charge his box. From his previous deductions, the 0 might require death. The men at the bar had died too quickly. Or maybe there hadn't been enough of them, so the box hadn't reacted at all. The raiders who were their partners were ruthless thugs. Worse, the main force behind this operation included heavy hitters like Rick, Shane, and Merle. With the advantage of surprise, it was a relatively safe, winnable raid. It's safe, there's plenty of fuel, and I can curry favor with the others to solidify my image as a genius. Louis calculated. If he went along, he could test his theory. It was a very cost-effective move. He'd always wanted to survive. That hadn't changed. But surviving didn't mean living like a startled quail, cowering forever in a supposedly safe corner and refusing every risk. In this apocalypse, where order had collapsed and walkers lurked everywhere, there was no absolute safety. Whether it was the current farm or a future prison, danger was always at his heels. If he wanted to control his fate, he couldn't just lay low until the finale. His progress studying 12 was painfully slow. The deeper he practiced, the more he sensed subtle differences between the 12 he cast and the 12 described in the original texts. If he didn't untangle those mysteries, he might never truly get strong. The box was his only lead. If he could somehow contact Hogwarts again or receive systematic guidance, everything might change. It might even be his only hope of getting back to Hogwarts someday. That night, Rick, wait. Just as the convoy was about to pull out, Dale broke from the RV, panting, and caught Rick as he was getting into the car. That captive, Randall. Dale put his hands on his knees and looked at Rick dead serious. If you guys leave, what about him? We can't just leave him tied up in the 17 like an animal. What if his wound gets infected? We don't have time to deal with this, Dale. Rick was checking the magazine of his rifle and didn't even look up. Our people are still being tortured by those thugs. That's priority number 1. But any other issues will have to wait until we get back. Rick snapped his head up, cutting him off. Once we've got our people, we'll have a meeting to decide what to do with him. Until then, he stays where he is. Dale glanced at the group, all geared up and radiating murderous intent. It wasn't the time to argue moral codes. He could only sigh and step back. Fine, just be careful. Rick nodded and swung into the car. A moment before he closed the door, he ducked his head and motioned Morales, who was staying behind. Using the car as cover, he dropped his voice, eyes cold in the shadow. Keep an eye on that kid. If he makes a move or tries to run. He made a throat-slitting gesture instead of finishing the sentence. Morales' face tightened. He looked at the 17, then nodded solemnly. Understood. Also, Rick added, voice lower still, if none of us come back tomorrow. He glanced long at the farm where his wife and son were. Kill him too. We can't risk those thugs tracking this place down. With those final orders, he shut the door and slammed it. Move out. Half an hour later, the convoy cut their engines and stopped in a dense patch of woods not far from the target. They slipped out and, under cover of night and brush, moved on foot toward the compound. A massive building soon took shape in the gloom, an abandoned auto repair and recycling yard. The Philadelphia Alliance knew how to use the terrain. Scrapped cars had been piled by crane into high walls, layer upon layer, forming a labyrinth of rusted metal that screened the inside from sight and kept walkers at bay. The main entrance was blocked with several layers of barbed wire, and 2 makeshift guard towers of tires and iron stood on either side. Rick put on his night vision goggles and surveyed the guards. Compared to the crazed believers, these men were slack. The beams from the towers swung erratically. The guards with flashlights weren't constantly watching the front, stopping now and then, and sometimes lazily pointing their lights at a tin can to play with it. Down below, 2 patrols carried rifles and led fierce-looking wolves, but it didn't make them look professional. "Hey, I'm saying." One skinny patrolman stopped, slung his gun, and let his gaze drift toward a warehouse deeper inside the yard. "Since nothing's going on, why don't we go find some fun in the cages over there?" "You're insane," his buddy hissed. "Boss said step up security tonight. If you want your head blown off, go ahead and wander off, but don't drag me into it." "Oh, come on. There's nothing in this ghost place besides walkers. What the hell could happen?" The skinny man grumbled, but thinking of the boss's methods, he didn't actually move. Fine, let's keep patrolling. What a damn buzzkill." "They're like that," Rick whispered, lowering his goggles. "A bunch of hoodlums tied together by violence and fear." Shane added from the side, a cold glint in his eyes. "If they're undisciplined but terrified of their leader, that says the leader's methods are brutal. As long as he's alive, this group won't break." "Then we find a way in first." Rick drew back and signaled the team to spread out and scout. They circled more than halfway around under cover of night, but every approach was blocked. Piled cars and barbed wire left no point of entry. "These bastards have walled themselves up like a tin can," one muttered. Merle flopped back into the grass, losing patience. "Screws and plans. Give me a break. How about we just give 'em a big bang? Blow this turtle shell wide open?" "No." Rick pressed a hand to Daryl's shoulder, his voice low and firm. "Our primary goal is to save people. A direct assault could easily injure anyone inside," he went on. "If there's a big explosion, all manner of creatures for miles around will be drawn here. Even if we win, getting out safely with the wounded will be nearly impossible." He turned his head and motioned. "Stick to the plan. We find that side door." They slid low into the shadows beside the recycling station. There was a small iron door for hauling scrap, tucked out of sight, just as Randall had said. The guards here were even lazier than those at the main gate. 2 men slumped in a corner, smoking and handling their guns carelessly. Shane studied the scene through night vision and then frowned. "There's a problem. The door's locked." A huge, old-fashioned padlock sealed the iron door. "The guards are no trouble, but the patrol isn't great," Shane said. "If we force the lock, the sound will carry and alert them." "We need the keys," Rick said quietly, staring at the padlock. Shane pointed to the sentry box above the main gate. Through a streaked window, they could see a dozing guard, feet up on the table, and a half-empty beer at his side. Above him, keys glittered on a hook in the dim yellow light. "They really are there," T-Dog muttered. "That's a long shot." Rick waited. "Without the keys, our options are to force the door or create a diversion to get the guards away. Both raise the risk of exposure and could turn this into a firefight." "Can we get them?" Daryl asked. He sounded doubtful. Rick shook his head. "There aren't any climbing points nearby. To get across, someone would have to run through an open area completely exposed to the guards." "I could try," Glenn offered. "I'm fast. I could sprint when the sweep goes past." "No, too risky," Rick cut him off. "They may be lax, but there are a lot of them out there. And they have dogs." They all fell silent, measuring the thin possibilities. Then a small hand tugged at Daryl's sleeve. Daryl looked down. Louis stood beside him, fully kitted, a tactical helmet on his head, a bulletproof vest cinched tight, the rest of him wrapped up for protection. Rick had made him get the gear before they left. Louis didn't say anything at first. He simply stared at the sentry box, then pointed. "Those keys." He turned to the group, and for the first time a flash of confidence lit his face. "I might be able to get them." Everyone stared. Merle snorted and looked the boy up and down. "What, you gonna fly over there, Peter Pan?" "No." Louis shook his head and reached back to pat the backpack he'd been carrying. "I have Robin." "Robin?" Merle's face went blank, then his eyes widened with a dawning realization. "Oh, damn, you didn't bring that stupid bird too, did you?" Curious, he leaned forward and tried to poke at the pack. "How come it's been so quiet? Did it suffocate in there?" Daryl smacked Merle's hand away before it could touch the bag. The rest of them ignored Merle's running mouth and focused on Louis. Shane's brow tightened. Luis, I know you trained it at the facility, but this isn't a game. The light's tricky. The layout's tight. Are you sure the owl will understand? Let it try, Louis said. He sounded certain. Even if it fails, they'll just think a bird's looking for food. That's the least risky option we've got. They exchanged looks. It was audacious, but Louis didn't take risks he hadn't prepared for. Rick nodded. All right, try it. Louis tilted his head and spoke softly toward the open flap of his backpack. Come out, Robin. The flap shifted. A round, downy head pushed through, blinking and surveying the dark with bright, intelligent eyes. Louis whispered a few commands and made a few gestures, then pointed toward the lit sentry box. Go, Robin, he said. He stroked the owl's feathers and promised, I'll give you an extra meal tomorrow. The little owl ruffled, its golden eyes gleaming, then unfolded its wings and slipped into the night like a quiet, russet ghost. Everyone held their breath as it vanished against the black. Robin threaded the beams of light with uncanny skill and landed as lightly as a fallen leaf on the sentry box windowsill. The guard inside kept snoring. The owl cocked its head, watched the man, then hopped onto the console and, with surgical precision, seized the set of keys in its talons. There was a small metallic clink as the keys bumped the hook. The guard stirred, his eyelids fluttering, but before he could rouse, Robin was gone, slipping back into the darkness. The man merely rolled over and resumed his sleep. Seconds later, the owl was back on Louis's shoulder, the cold keys clenched in its beak. It rubbed against Louis's helmet as though asking to be rewarded. Rick took the keys, and a string of astonished sounds escaped from the grass. Oh my God, T-Dog breathed. Is that bird a genius? 128. Infiltration. Successful. The corners of Daryl's mouth twitched up. He shot a smug look at the stunned Merle beside him and snorted. See that? Told you this bird would come in handy. I picked it up. Merle rolled his eyes and dropped his voice to deflate him. It's not like you raised it. What are you so proud of? Enough. Shut it. Rick slid the keys away, cutting off the brothers' bickering. His eyes were hard with purpose. This is our chance. Move out. With the keys in hand, the infiltration went smoothly. Merle and Daryl became two dark shadows. Using the scrap cars for cover, they crept up on the guards posted at the side door. They moved in perfect sync. Merle clapped a hand over the left guard's mouth, while Daryl's knife flashed and cut the right guard's throat. Neither made a sound as their bodies were dragged off into the undergrowth. A soft click, the key turned in the lock, and the side door eased open. Rick signaled, and the group slipped in single file, fanning out to take cover behind hulks of metal in the yard. Everything was quiet and efficient, an expression of the deadly rapport they'd built through countless fights. But no operation goes perfectly. Just as they eased into the inner courtyard and prepared to push toward the workshop where the captives were held, a chained hound beneath a scrap car erupted into frantic barking. The dog was sharper than the lazy guards. Its barking cut through the night and stripped away their stealth. Who's there? Rats! Intruders! The compound exploded into chaos. The previously closed roller shutter was yanked open. Boots pounded. Weapons were slapped into readiness. Searchlights and weapon-mounted beams flared to life, stabbing into the dark. Stop! On the rusted corrugated walkway above, a burly man in a filthy tank top, arms a map of tattoos, pushed through his men and peered over the railing with a modified submachine gun in his hands. He blinked at how quietly they'd come in, but with dozens of fully armed men already posted on the high ground, his expression stayed smug. He wanted to enjoy this. Yo, middle of the night, and you gotta make such a scene? Leaning a hand on the railing, he wore a fake cat-and-mouse smile. Don't worry, fellas. If you're lost or looking for a little gas, we can talk like civilized people. In times like these, a living person is worth more than a bullet. No need to spray flesh and blood the moment we meet, right? He babbled on, playing hospitable to try to make Rick and the others lower their guard while subtly signaling his men to flank and encircle. We're all friends here. A rocket streaked through the air. An instant later, a deafening explosion ripped the second-floor walkway apart. A fireball ate the area behind the leader, blowing a huge hole in the thin corrugated wall. The men standing behind him didn't have time to cry out before flames and shrapnel tore them apart, sending bodies and railing crashing down. The leader's beast-quick reflexes saved him. He dove to the side, the blast hurling him behind a distant sandbag fortification. Dazed and battered, he lived because of cover and distance. Smoke and debris filled the air. Rick's ears were ringing from the blast. He wiped grit from his face and shouted at Merle. "Merle, didn't I tell you not to make such a big noise?" "Yeah." Merle tossed the still-warm launcher aside, shrugging with a roguish grin. "That's why I only fired one. Nice and easy." Daryl's ears ringing as well. He flipped his brother a middle finger in support. Seeing tempers about to flare, Glenn stepped forward, awkward but focused. Anyway, we're in. Let's focus on the job." The leader crawled up from behind the sandbags, blood and dust streaking his face. The fake smile was gone. He flicked grit from his hand, and his eyes went cold. "Looks like you picked the hard way." "Kill them," he snarled. Bullets began to rain. The courtyard turned into a hail of metal as rounds pinged off the scrap cars. Windshields shattered into a glittering storm under the searchlights. "Damn it! Heavy fire! I'm pinned!" T-Dog was flattened behind a stack of massive tires, unable to lift his head. Andrea's palms were slick as she gripped her rifle, forcing herself to breathe steady and take the shot. Bang! One crisp report cut through the chaos. The thug on the machine gun froze, a bloom of red spreading across his chest. He toppled. The gun went silent. With the suppression lifted, T-Dog risked a peek and then gave Andrea a relieved thumbs up. "Nice shot, Andrea." Bullets continued to slam into rubber and metal, sending chunks and dust flying waist high. "What are you scared of? They might have numbers, but they're just a mob." Merle crouched behind the hood of a stripped sedan, working his shotgun while peering through a gap in the chassis. He leaned out and blew the head off a thug trying to flank them. The leader, though shaken, had his advantage in terrain. He crouched behind a thick steel plate and watched the fight with a predator's patience. He knew his place and his tricks. "Idiots who don't even know they're dead," he muttered, then barked orders. "Take men and go around through the scrap piles in back. Block every exit. I want them alive. We'll have some fun." One subordinate hesitated, glancing toward the rear. "Boss, aren't people, women and kids, hidden near the workshops? If a fight breaks out, they'll get caught." The leader spat, impatient and cold. "Who cares about them? No time for that. Weaklings are just wasted food. If they die, it lightens the load." The subordinate swallowed and shut up. The leader pointed to a modified pickup welded over with steel plates and spikes. A savage grin spread across his face. "Go! Bring out the beast! Since these rats like hiding behind cars, smash right through them. Men and cars alike," the leader snapped. "Yes, sir," his men shouted, already moving to obey. The battle erupted into chaos. Luis had kept his promise and had not charged in with Rick and the others. He crouched behind a massive tractor tire, but he wasn't idle. With an amulet hidden in his sleeve, his blue eyes calmly scanned the battlefield, picking out every opportunity to exploit. A thug crouched on the roof of a truck, grinning as he lit a Molotov and wound up to hurl it at the cover where Rick's group was gathered. "In your dreams," Luis muttered, case-tip, narrowing his eyes as he aimed the smallest motion at the ground. Just as the man let the Molotov go, the bottle seemed to be seized by an invisible hand, slipped from his fingers and fell back, smashing at his own feet. Glass shattered, fuel splashed everywhere, and flames engulfed him in an instant. "Ah!" he screamed, a human torch tumbling from the roof, rolling across the metal and setting nearby oil drums alight. "Shit! Are you an idiot? Slipping now?" someone shouted. The leader cursed. "Useless piece of trash." But the streak of bad luck didn't stop there. The garage door ripped open and a heavily modified pickup, its front bolted with steel plates and jagged spikes, roared out. This war rig was the leader's trump card. It charged for Daryl's defensive line, aiming to plow straight through. "Get out of the way," Daryl barked, shoving Glenn aside. At that moment, Louis flicked his amulet, sending a tiny change at the spilled oil and loose concrete in the truck's path. The once flat slab buckled. A patch of slick oil seemed to slither, and it slid exactly under the pickup's front wheels. Tires screeched. The truck lost traction. The wheel jerked wildly, and the vehicle spun as if drunk. With a deafening crash, it slammed into a concrete support pillar. The front crumpled, black smoke poured out, and the pickup was a wreck. A sub-leader riding shotgun was flung clear by the force and crashed into the leader who had been nearby. The two tumbled together, soaked in gasoline. Cough, cough, fuck, one of them spluttered as the leader scrambled up, grief and rage contending on his face. The luck today was absurd. First, the Molotov self-destructed, now their escape vehicle was ruined. His men usually made mistakes, but never like this. It felt like they were cursed by a god of misfortune. Across the yard, the attackers fought like they'd been injected with adrenaline, while his fighters kept collapsing and their defenses crumbled. "These people are trouble," he growled, and a cold thought formed in his mind: retreat. He valued his own life, and continuing would only mean total loss. "Retreat! Back door!" he barked. "Boss!" a lackey called. He pointed back toward the warehouse and shouted, "But our families are still inside. We have to take them." Several men hesitated, glancing at the leader. For a heartbeat, his foot faltered. Hearing the gunfire closing in, a ruthless clarity cut across his face. If they insisted on bringing their burdens, no one would escape. "There's no time. We can't save them," the leader snapped. "Move." "No, I'm not leaving." The lackey's eyes were red as he bolted for the warehouse. "I'm going back." Bang! A single shot cracked, blood spraying from the back of the man's head. He slumped to the ground. The leader stood with his smoking gun, looking at his stunned men with a cold, dead expression. "Anyone else want to stay behind with him?" Silence fell. No one moved. The leader holstered his pistol and led the remaining thugs toward the back exit. They threw the heavy iron gate open and saw only a wall of metal. A massive trailer had been reversed into place, its bulk sealing the rear exit. "Hey, where do you think you're going?" a voice taunted. Shane was crouched in the trailer cab doorway, half his body revealed, and the dark muzzle of his gun jutting out. Bullets ripped into the two men who were out front. "Damn it, we're blocked," one of them yelled. Trapped between the approaching attackers at the front and an iron blockade behind them, the leader felt his earlier smugness evaporate. He was breathing hard, backed against the warehouse wall, shock and fury warping his face. But the cornered animal can still think. Something about this raid didn't add up. At first, he'd assumed it was a simple grab for territory or supplies. But who fires an explosive to blow a huge hole in the second floor unless they want to destroy the place? If they'd come just to loot, they'd have hit and run after seizing goods. No need to waste ammo or risk drawing attention from patrols just to seal front and back and fight to the death. They were willing to spend resources to close every exit. They weren't here to take over. They wanted to wipe them out. Or worse, they might be here for someone inside. His eyes flicked toward the other locked door, where the captives and the stored goods were kept. A single thought struck like lightning: these lunatics could be here for revenge, or to rescue someone they cared about. "All right," he said, making a cold decision. If they couldn't run, they'd fight to the bitter end. If the attackers were here for the captives, those prisoners, once seen as nothing but burdens, might be his last bargaining chip. "Drag the captives out," he roared to the remaining men. "Quick, if they want us dead, those captives die with us." Minutes later, Rick led Shane and the others around, clearing the perimeter. Their guns were leveled at the final warehouse door as they closed in. "Don't move," Rick called through his teeth. "If anyone takes one more step, I'll kill them." 130, second generation of sheep. The workshop door slid open with a gust of forced bravado. The leader stepped out, dragging a battered man with cracked glasses and bruises all over him. He pressed the muzzle of a pistol to the man's temple, hiding behind him, eyes wide with a frantic testing glare. "Back off! Everyone, back off! Drop your guns," he barked. Through the spiderwebbed lenses, the glasses man could make out the newcomers clearly. It was Rick and Shane. A flare of delirious hope lit his dead stare. They'd come to save us. But Rick didn't move. He only shook his head, barely. Panic twisted in the glasses man's gut. He'd almost blurted something that would have given them away, but he clamped his mouth shut until his lips split. If these thugs knew he was connected to the newcomers, he'd be a bargaining chip, possibly his death and their capture. So he forced himself to be mute, though his whole body trembled. The leader, keyed up and tense, missed the tiny exchange. All he saw was the steady muzzle of Rick's gun. "Are you deaf?" Rick didn't lower his weapon. He stepped forward, expression cold. "We don't know this man," he said flatly. The leader wavered. If Rick had no interest in the hostage, maybe he truly was a stranger. "Back off, or I'll kill him. He's innocent," he shouted. "If you want to kill an irrelevant stranger to scare me." Rick's voice was low and then abrupt. Bang! He fired without further warning. The shot whined past the glasses man's shoulder, ripped into the steel door behind them, and showered sparks across the concrete. It had missed by centimeters. One tremor, and the hostage's head would have been blown off. Tsk! Merle, standing beside Rick, rolled his eyes theatrically. "Can you aim or not? How do you miss from here?" "If you want, let me try. I'll put one through both of them," he said, already hoisting his shotgun with a savage grin, eager to split the pair open. The leader's resolve faltered. His men were shaking. "Boss, what do we do?" his lieutenant squeaked. "They look crazy." Rick's demeanor didn't change, but the leader's suspicion sharpened. He forced himself to ask one more question. "If you were just here to rob us, why did the suppressive fire stop so suddenly? If you didn't care about the hostage, why waste words? Why not just open fire?" Rick's face hardened. He let the voice he'd been holding come out, low, familiar, the cadence of a sermon. In his mind, for a beat, flashed the charlatan who'd called himself the shepherd. Rick's lips curved in a cold arc as he leaned into the role. "You're right to ask," he said. "We don't care if this man lives or dies." He kept his gun steady. "But if you lay down your weapons now and release all the lambs, we will give you a chance." The leader's eyes brightened ever so slightly, and then Rick finished the sentence. "A chance to face judgment." "Judgment?" The leader's face went slack. Behind him, the men erupted, fear spreading like wildfire. "The believers? That bunch of lunatics is back?" "I saw the fire," another protested. Panic mushroomed. A few of the cowards in the crowd took a couple of stumbling steps back. You're the believers," the leader shouted, disbelieving. "Impossible. Your factory was blown up." Rick said nothing to deny it. He simply stared at the man as if peering into an empty grave. "Fire can purify the flesh," he intoned, voice hard as flint, "but it cannot burn away faith." He took a step forward, imposing. "We could have killed you where you stood and let your filthy souls go straight to hell. But God is merciful," he added, slower, almost savoring the words. "We're willing to give you a chance to accept judgment and wash away your sins." Hearing Rick and hearing the tone sent a shiver through the group. Shane's mouth twitched. He fought to keep the corners of his lips from breaking into a smile at the absurdity. Merle, quicker to adapt, tilted his head and spat out a grotesque parody of sanctimony. "Death or judgment. Now choose. We're just so fucking merciful, aren't we?" he sneered, smirking into the role. Lewis, hunched in the shadows with the others, watched the performance with surprised admiration. He'd never expected upright, straight-arrow Rick to put on a shepherd act, but seeing Rick embrace the phony fanaticism, the rigid righteousness, and the dark promise of judgment made it work. His anger and the rigid calm in his voice filled in the gaps where the impersonation was a little stiff. Andrea, baffled, had no idea what Rick was up to. T-Dog and Glenn pinched their mouths tight, fighting the urge to laugh. The others watched with mixed feelings. Daryl's neck jerked as if he wanted to crawl away. It helped that the night was thick, the light dim, and that the leader's attention was locked forward, so he missed the group's awkward micro-expressions. All of it matched the leader's fearful image of the believers, the sanctimonious phrasing, the obsession with judgment, the loathing for sinners. His mind raced. Maybe the factory had been a decoy. Maybe those fanatics hadn't died. Maybe they'd tracked them here. But the believers were formalistic and theatrical. If they were going to capture him alive, they'd drag out some ceremony. There would be a time gap, and as long as he lived, there was a chance to escape. One more minute alive was better than nothing. "Fine," he croaked. His jaw worked. The fierce light in his eyes drained away and was replaced by a shaky, wary compromise. "I accept judgment. Don't shoot." Rick's gun didn't lower. He watched the leader surrender. The man who had minutes before been ready to pull the trigger on his own hostage now offering himself up, just as Rick had planned. 131. Although the believer died, he loosened his grip on the glasses, man's throat, and shouted back toward the workshop. "Bring everyone else out, now." Reluctant underlings obeyed, pushed by the leader's command and the black muzzles leveled at them. They opened another door and shoved a group of ragged, scarred threes into the light. Most of them stared at the ground, hollow-eyed, too beaten to even look up, sure it was another round of punishment. Rick kept his palms tight around his gun, sweat slicking the grip, but he kept a judge's cold, steady expression. His finger hovered near the trigger, ready to take a shot the moment the other side relaxed. Everything was moving in the right direction. Until one of the men dragged out had been locked in the back and had missed the earlier exchange. The moment he saw Rick's face in the daylight, he lost it, crying out like a child seeing a father. "I knew you'd come! Officer, save us!" Silence fell like a stone. The glasses man, who'd been playing along, shut his eyes and cursed the idiot under his breath. Even Rick's cold expression snapped taut. The leader, who'd been lowering his gun, froze. His look slid from the glasses man up to the shouting man, and then locked hard on Rick. A grin crawled across his face like a man relieved to be alive. "Ha!" He laughed, tightening his grip on the hostage's neck and shrinking himself behind the man so only bloodshot eyes showed. I knew it. It's no coincidence. He had assumed he was dealing with religious fanatics who could do anything in the name of doctrine, people who might kill the hostage just as easily as anyone else. If that were true, he had no leverage. But the idiot's cry had exposed them. They were all connected. "Officer? Companions?" the leader snarled. "So you're all together." The balance shifted. "Now!" He slammed the barrel of his gun back against the glasses man's temple and barked at Rick. "Drop your guns! Now! Or I'll blow his brains out all over you." Rick didn't lower his weapon. He narrowed his eyes and spoke so calm it was chilling. "I wouldn't advise you to talk to me that way. It will only make you die faster." "Enough talk," the leader snapped, the finger on the trigger tightening. "Don't forget, I have one of your people. You're here to rescue him, aren't you?" Shane stepped out from the side with a sneer. "Is that so?" he taunted, then pointed at the corpse on the ground. "If that's what you think matters, fine, but we have something even more important to you." The leader's grin faltered as Shane finished. "Your life." Shane's voice was flat. "We came to finish you. These people? If we can save them, great. If not..." He let the thought hang, then added, "We won't mind waiting for them to die and dragging you down with them. If you really think holding a few lives is a threat to us, you should wake up," Rick said. The words hit like a blow. The leader's face went hard, the hostages went pale. If the prisoners were useless bargaining chips, he had no cards left. "I don't believe you," the leader ground out, sweat mixing with grime on his cheeks. "I don't believe you don't care. Back off! Get back!" He backed, clutching the glasses man, trying to retreat into the truck. "We can let you go," he offered, voice edged with hope. Rick's hand stilled. "Leave the man," he said. He lowered his gun in a measured gesture. "Take the rest and get out of here." The leader weighed them, then nodded. "Fine." He shouted orders, and his men released the other survivors, who scrambled to Rick's side. "You win, pal." The leader stepped back until the truck door was at his knees. Keeping one eye on Rick, he touched the handle. "I don't want trouble, and we released most of them. But this one..." He tightened his arm around the glasses man's neck and gave a nasty grin. "For our safety on the road, he comes with us for a while. Once we're somewhere safe, he'll be released." Daryl snapped, raising his crossbow. "Let him go, or I'll pin you to the truck." "Back off," the leader roared, gun again pressed to the hostage's head. The standoff froze everything. Rick frowned, weighing a shot. "Let him go." The voice came from the shadows, childish yet eerily calm. The leader turned to find a force stepping out from behind a stack of old tires, wearing a tactical helmet and bulletproof vest that made the figure look like an iron barrel. In his hand was a dark wooden stick. "Who are you?" The leader barked, incredulous and amused. Louis didn't answer directly. He stared at the leader with a straight face and, echoing Rick's tone, said, "Turn back now, and there's still a chance to make things right. Even a man full of sin, if he repents at this moment, can still be redeemed." He lifted the stick slowly, pointing it at the center of the leader's forehead. His voice dropped cold. "Otherwise, I represent the gods. I will carry out final judgment, reduce you to ash in the endless fires of hell." The leader scoffed. "Huh? Judge me?" He looked at the little armored figure and the strange, fierce group gathered around him and couldn't decide whether to laugh or be angry. With you? With that broken wooden stick? Yes, Louis answered deadpan. This is the gavel of your judgment and the key to hell. The absurd certainty in the boy's voice made the leader's skin prick. He stared at the ragged group and then at the RAF-4, speaking apocalyptic nonsense with a straight face, his certainty hardening into a single terrifying conclusion. They were lunatics. 132. Science and magic. Screw your gavel. The leader stopped paying attention to the crazy kid. He just wanted to get out of this godforsaken place as fast as he could. He yanked the car door open and reached to drag the hostage inside. Everyone back off, or else, in that instant, whoosh! A brilliant ball of orange-red flame erupted from the tip of a nondescript wooden stick and shot several meters across the lot in an instant. What? The leader went pale. He reflexively raised his gun. Just as his finger curled on the trigger, a strange, tremendous force seized the pistol. The leader felt the weapon in his hand yanked and twisted by something unseen, and his shot went wild into the sky. Seizing the chance, the man with glasses summoned every last scrap of will to live, rolled on the ground, and sprinted toward Rick and the others. The fireball landed lightly on the leader. Whoosh! Boom! With a hair-raising crackle of combustion, an impossible thing happened. That tiny ember of flame exploded outward, swelling hundreds of times over and engulfing the leader in a column of living fire. How is this possible? The henchmen hadn't even had time to react before their leader was on fire. They stumbled back in shock, faces frozen with horror. What's going on? How did he suddenly catch fire? Ah! A shrill, agonized scream ripped across the auto repair shop. The leader had become a human torch, rolling and thrashing on the ground. Pain robbed him of thought. His hands clawed at the flames as though they were maggots. Everything had happened too fast to make sense. What? What is this? The thugs who had planned to resist were now cowards in an instant, eyes nearly popping from their sockets. They had seen a streak of fire launch from Louis's hand, and then their boss had turned into a fireball as if cursed. Judgment! They can actually judge us! One of them dropped his gun and fled, clutching his head and screaming. On Louis's side, everyone stared in stunned silence. Merle's mouth hung open. Daryl had lowered his crossbow slightly, staring at the blaze in disbelief. Only Rick kept his head. When the fire flared, a flash of confusion crossed his face. Magic? No. Carl's offhand remarks flickered through his mind, threads connecting in his brain. Understanding hit him, and he turned that shock into action. Do it! Rick roared and lifted his gun first. Bang! Bang! 2 shots dropped 2 still dazed attackers. The rest were jolted into motion by the gunfire, and following their training, poured accurate fire at the remaining enemies. Seconds later, the shop fell silent. The leader had been roasted to a crisp. There wasn't a single enemy left standing. All eyes converged on Louis, who stood in the shadows, fiddling with the wooden stick. Normally, everyone would scatter, check for wounds, loot supplies, clear the scene and get out, but no one moved. The conjured fire was so shocking that even the smell of charred flesh couldn't pull their attention away. They all stared at that unassuming stick. Rick looked at the faces around him as if they had seen an alien. He started to speak, but Glenn, who was closest to Louis, couldn't keep his curiosity down any longer. He stepped up and pointed from the still smoking leader to Louis's hand. Louis, that just now was. He trailed off, eyes wide. Was that what I think it was? I mean, a fireball? Magic? Yeah, Louis flicked the stick casually and then met Glenn's stare with a solemn nod. That's right. It's magic. I just learned it recently. He even looked around at the dumbfounded crowd with an almost innocent expression and asked, Do you guys want to learn? Shane opened his mouth to demand an explanation. This was beyond him. But when he saw Rick's face, he froze. Rick wasn't shocked. There was a hint of hesitation, a weary resignation. Shane's years working with Rick told him to trust that Rick knew what he was doing. He swallowed his questions and held back. Someone else couldn't hold back. What the hell? Merle's uneven eyes glittered as if his worldview had been torn open. Are you serious, kid? There's really magic in this world? He stared at Louis and then at the wooden stick with a greedy intensity. We can learn it too? You sure? Of course. Louis's tone was matter of fact. Anyone can learn it if they get the hang of it. I can teach you right now. He handed the still warm device to Glenn. Here, try it. Glenn took the wooden stick like it was a sacred relic, his hands shaking. Can I really do it? I don't have any experience. Don't be nervous. Just follow my lead. Lewis went into teacher mode. Step 1. Stand up straight and face your target sideways. Like this. Glenn puffed out his chest and forced a solemn shooting posture. Lewis continued. Step 2. Take a deep breath. Focus on the tip of the wand and imagine a ball of fire burning there. Glenn inhaled, eyes fixed on the stick's tip, face flushed from holding his breath. Everyone watched him like spectators at a trick. Even Merle, moments ago reeling, leaned in greedily so he wouldn't miss a detail. Don't worry, everyone will get a chance. Lewis nodded at Merle and pointed to a nearly hidden little bump on the handle. Step 3. The important part. Press this switch firmly. Click. Glenn's finger depressed it reflexively. Whoosh! A burst of orange flame sprang from the tip of the wand, shooting over a meter and nearly singeing Merle's eyebrows. Holy shit! Merle leapt back. Glenn looked between the fire and the switch, his expression collapsing into stunned confusion. A switch? He croaked. Yeah. Louis shrugged, still wearing that innocent look. It's nothing complicated. It's a simple trick. As long as there's a battery and it's packed with some fuel-soaked paper, you press the switch, the paper ignites, and the fireball shoots out. I made it for Carl and the others to play with. Didn't expect to use it this soon. He spread his hands. I haven't learned the real incendio yet, so I had to use science to substitute for magic. The crowd was speechless. Emotions bounced around like ping-pong balls. Even Robin, the owl perched on Louis' shoulder, hooted twice and flapped in approval. T-Dog, recovering from the shock, that pointed at the charred corpse and asked the question everyone had in the back of their minds. Okay, fine. If it's just a small flame, how did it burn him up like that? That's right. Shane murmured his agreement as he looked down at the burned corpse, nodding thoughtfully. He burned too fast. It was almost like he was soaked in gasoline. Before Lewis could elaborate, Daryl, who had been watching in silence, came over. He glanced at the body and said in a low voice, When that runaway pickup hit the pillar earlier and the leader and his men went flying, they got splashed with leaking gas. In that situation, you don't need a torch. Throw a cigarette and he'd go up for sure. Rick stood to the side, watching, and couldn't help shaking his head with a helpless little smile. He'd suspected as much. He'd heard Carl mention Louis tinkering with a toy and had even helped gather some electronic parts. The truth didn't surprise him. Tsk. Daryl shot a hard look at Merle and the others, who still looked shell-shocked, and sneered. Magic, my ass. He mocked them openly. Only idiots would swallow that crap. Even though his hand holding the crossbow had trembled for a moment when the fire had erupted, he wasn't above laughing now. All right, enough standing around. Rick cut off the banter, his face settling into command. The gunfire and the blaze are going to attract walkers. We made too much noise. We need to move now. The group snapped out of their shock and jokes and plunged into the work of cleaning up after the fight. The battle had been quick, and the auto repair shop was enclosed by walls. Although nearby walkers had noticed the commotion, they hadn't formed a perimeter yet. They still had time to get what they could. Lewis, not forgetting his reason for tagging along, grabbed his medical kit and hurried over to the rescued men. There had been 5 of them. Only 3 were still alive. Is it just you 3? He asked, working quickly to assess wounds. One of them had his throat cut right after we were captured for not following orders. The other was bitten earlier, had to be left behind. Louis didn't press for more. Of the 3 survivors, the worst off was the bespectacled man, who'd been closest to the leader and caught the brunt of the blast. Don't move, your skin's burned. Louis cut away the charred sleeve of the man's shirt and began treating the burn. Luckily, it's superficial. It hasn't hit muscle or bone. Rest for a bit and you'll be all right. The cooling ointment eased the sting. The bespectacled man hissed but looked at Louis with grateful eyes. Thank you. Thank you, Louis. If it weren't for you all. Rick? A heavier voice cut through the warm moment. Andrea had come up, her expression unsettled. There are people still in the back workshop. Who? An ambush? Shane snapped, already training his gun toward the rear door. No, The bespectacled man shook his head weakly. It's the families of those thugs. Mostly women and children, and some older folks who didn't want to fight. Silence fell like a weight. Everyone turned toward the door. Through the crack, they could hear muffled weeping and frightened whispers. The question of what to do hit everyone at once. Do we take them with us? Daryl asked Rick. If we leave them here without the thugs' protection, they won't last long. Merle snorted. You gonna babysit the murderers' wives and kids? Don't be stupid. They're probably already planning how to get revenge, T-Dog muttered, glancing toward the doorway. There are children in there. Rick's gaze moved between the door and his people. Killing defenseless women and children crossed a line he couldn't bring himself to cross, but dragging the families of their enemies along was a huge risk. He stood in silence for a long moment, weighing the options. Let them stay, he decided finally. We won't kill them, but we're not taking them. Shane still looked uneasy. They're a future problem. They've seen us. What if later? They haven't seen us. Louis cut in, finishing the bandage on the bespectacled man's arm and standing up. He met everyone's eyes calmly. They were hiding behind that door the whole time. They only heard the gunfire and shouting. And, Louis added, nodding at Rick, don't forget our little judgment performance. He let the thought hang there. To anyone listening from inside, the attackers they'd heard would have sounded like that group of religious fanatics, the believers, the very people the thugs had feared. Tell them we were the ones who rescued these captured men from the believers during the chaos. It makes perfect sense. Relief spread through the group at Louis' suggestion. It solved the moral problem without inviting revenge. Rick looked at Louis, realization dawning. He finally understood why Louis had mimicked the shepherd's preaching voice earlier, talking about God's judgment and representing him. Is this something you planned? Rick asked. No, Louis said. I thought of it on the fly, after watching what you did. Rick was briefly speechless. So there might still be rumors of the believers around here. Louis shrugged. Muddy the waters. If there are any real remnants of those lunatics, this might stir them up and make them fight among themselves. Rick breathed out and nodded. All right, everyone, move fast. Only take the most valuable stuff. Half an hour later, the convoy rolled again. The haul was excellent. They found a trove of repair tools and spare parts, and most importantly, a large supply of fuel, an answer to the farm's worst worry. They also claimed a military truck and a modified pickup, loading both to the gills with supplies. Just as they were about to head out, Daryl pulled back a dusty tarpaulin behind a pile of discarded parts. Under it sat a wild-looking, expertly modified black Harley. Daryl swung a leg over and kicked the starter. The engine roared to life, deep and powerful, running like it had been loved forever. He ran a hand over the handlebars, a rare grin splitting his face. The noise drew Merle's head out of the truck up ahead. He whistled loud enough to echo and slapped the steering wheel. We're rich. We're fucking rich this time. Being hoodwinked earlier by Louis had still left a sour taste, but the load of supplies was balm enough. Let's go home. 134. Internal problems. When the vehicle finally merged onto the smooth highway, the tautness in everyone's nerves began to loosen. Louis exhaled, reached up to undo the strap of his tactical helmet, and took off the hot, cumbersome headgear. He leaned back against the seat, closed his eyes, and started replaying the night's operation in his head. First, there was the briefcase. He'd felt it react slightly, but he hadn't rushed to examine it. There were too many eyes around, and making a scene would be hard to explain. He'd wait until they were back at the farm and safely in his own room. As for the supposed fire seed technique at the end of the fight, there was no way it had been real magic. His current level of magic could barely make his gadget sputter sparks. In that situation, his first instinct had been to use the levitation charm to control a heavy object and knock the leader out. But the leader had slid himself entirely behind the hostage, making the angle almost impossible. Louis had gotten an idea. The leader was soaked in gasoline. Intense burning would destroy a person's rationality, make them instinctively drop what they were holding to smother the flames, and give the hostage a second of life. To ensure success, while pressing the electronic ignition, he had also been casting the levitation charm. That invisible force had lifted the leader's gun barrel, making every shot miss the hostage. Louis told himself that even if the method looked like a cheap trick now, it was an investment for the future. With that high-tech device setting a precedent, people would assume the thing in his hand was merely a special piece of science. Later, if he really learned incendio or lumos, they'd credit it to a better fuel mixture or a brighter bulb. And if someday he managed to learn something like fiendfire, well, if he could do that, explanations would be unnecessary. Robin had also done excellent work tonight. Sending the creature to steal the keys had been a risk, but Louis trusted it from the time they'd spent together. Whether it was its constitution or natural talent, the little thing was unnervingly smart. It followed complex instructions and had even learned to read faces. When Louis sent it on perimeter duty, it completed missions and, occasionally, thoughtfully left a few fat field mice by his pillow as thanks. Those treats usually ended up in Daryl's pot anyway. Daryl, outwardly cold but soft inside, sometimes gave Robin scraps in return. Sorting through his thoughts made Louis feel a little lighter. The surprise attack on the Marauders had ended much faster than he'd expected. Team coordination had been solid, fire suppression effective, and aside from a few minor injuries, there had been almost no losses. But his brow tightened as he looked out at the dark sweep of wilderness beyond the car window. The external threat had been dealt with, but an internal danger remained. The captive in the barn with the broken leg, Randall. In the original story, Randall had been a hot potato. Rick's group had argued violently over what to do with him. They captured him, released him, captured him again, and after endless debate decided to execute him, only to be stopped by Dale. That kind old man, clinging to the moral standards of the pre-collapse world, had pleaded with everyone, trying to stop them from killing an unarmed prisoner. Louis sighed inwardly. Dale was the conscience of the camp. He'd been tending the wounded and had not taken part in the attack on the Believers' factory, so he hadn't seen the full extent of their cruelty. He still judged the world by the old rules. If an enemy surrendered and was not an immediate threat, they should be treated humanely. Louis respected that. Anyone who could keep such a moral backbone in a collapsed world deserved admiration. But understanding is different from practicality. Randall knew where the farm was and knew who lived there. Even if Dale's intentions were noble, this was not the moment to release someone who might later bring doom on them all. Louis suspected there would be another fight when they returned. Reality proved him right. The day they came back to the farm, even abundant supplies couldn't lift the oppressive mood. When Rick proposed executing Randall, Dale predictably objected. To preserve the group's democracy, and perhaps to give the elder some face, Rick granted him one day. "If you can convince everyone to change their minds, we'll find another way," he'd said. Dale wandered the farm like a solitary missionary, pleading with Shane, Morales, Herschel, almost everyone. He tried to rouse the conscience of people who had crawled out of blood and fire, appealing to the moral standards of the old world. The response was brutal silence. The next morning, mist still clung to the grass outside the farm as Rick gathered everyone for an emergency meeting. There were no courtesies. Everyone had known this moment might come and understood the stakes. "Everyone knows the situation," Rick said, tired but resolute as he stood in the center of the crowd. "Although we eliminated Randall's gang, Randall himself isn't harmless. He knows the farm's location and what we look like. If we let him go, he could bring other thugs back or come for revenge. We can't take that risk. My proposal is, execute him." "No," the objection came instantly. It was Dale, glaring at Rick as if he couldn't believe his ears. "You weren't in that factory," said a steady female voice, Carol's, cutting him off. Everyone turned. Her composure hid a hard anger. "You have no idea how terrifying people can be now. Some commit evil not even for survival." She met Dale's eyes. They forced a gun into Carl's hands and made him point it at Dwayne's head. They made one child kill another for sport. Dale faltered at those words, but still shook his head. "I know those people were monsters. I know what they did, but Randall, he's just a teenager." He pointed toward the barn. "His team is gone, his leg's broken, he's tied to a post, he can't even stand, he poses no threat. We kill those thugs to survive, to save lives. I understand that," Dale continued, voice sharpening. "But now, If we drag out a defenseless prisoner and kill him in broad daylight, what purpose does that serve? Just for convenience? To save ourselves the trouble of watching him. He looked at them all. If we can take a life because of a possible danger, what's the difference between us and the believers? If we lose our bottom line, then what have we been surviving for? There was a heavy silence after Dale spoke, the farmers and fighters staring at their own hands as if trying to judge what they'd become. The choice loomed the way choices did in this world. Impossible and absolute. 135. Problem solving. When Dale's questions hung in the air, the crowd fell silent for a moment. Dale, Shane said finally. Maybe you're right. He wiped the gun in his hand with a rag, calm as ever. But you have to think about the rest of us, too. We can't keep an enemy who knows where our home is. Even if the chance of danger is small, I can't gamble with everyone's lives. Rick picked up the thread. He lied to get us to save him. He told us his people saved our companions. But now we know the truth. Dale opened his mouth, but the words stuck. He looked around. Andrea and Amy avoided his gaze. T-Dog stared at his boots. Even Glenn, usually gentle, only shook his head apologetically. Dale turned to Jim, desperate. Jim, do you think this is okay? Jim leaned against a tree, his eyes flat and distant. How we choose doesn't matter, Dale, he said quietly. Whatever we decide, maybe it's still better than how things would have ended. Dale didn't fully understand, but he knew Jim wouldn't support him. He swallowed and turned to Merle. Merle, he took a breath. What about you? Do you think he should be killed? Merle raised an eyebrow, surprised by the question. I've seen you reading the Bible lately. Dale stepped closer and locked eyes with him. I also know what you did in the factory to save the others, he said. You're not the kind of man who kills innocents for no reason. Merle's playful smirk fell away. He straightened, the sneer returning. Old man, don't put me on a pedestal. He spat the words out. I don't kill folks just for fun, but if something's an eyesore, I don't mind sending it on its way. Randall might be a coward, might look like a pathetic worm now, but as long as he's alive, he's an uncontrollable problem. In this world, problems often mean death. I'm not afraid of trouble, but I'm not going to risk my brother's life or the lives of these idiots for some piece of trash. He leaned in close to Dale, a cold smile creeping over his face. So yeah, I'll kill him. He paused, a strange glint in his eyes. His voice went low. I'll ask his name first, though. Remembering who I killed and then ending it quick, that's probably the only bit of decency I got left. He straightened and clapped a heavy hand on Dale's shoulder, mock-friendly. Whether it's a sin, I'll have plenty of time to chat with that old bastard god when I'm gone. He shrugged. Not that I'm ready to check out yet. Dale stood there, stunned. These faces he had known for years felt somehow altered, no longer confused or hesitant, but also missing something vital. We have no right to decide a person's life or death, he said, his voice thin but resolute. If we do this, we can't go back. Rick watched the elderly man with a flash of sadness. On the day the apocalypse came, Dale, we already couldn't go back. No, Rick, listen to me. Dale tried one last time. Bang. A dull gunshot cracked from the direction of the barn. Something's happened, someone shouted. Rick was the fastest. He drew his weapon and ran for the barn, the others close behind. Before they reached the door, it swung open from the inside. Carol stepped out, a pistol in her hand. Morales, who had been guarding inside, followed looking shaken and like he was about to say something but didn't. Carol blinked at the crowd as they rushed up, confused. What's wrong? Why'd you all come? Carol? Rick stopped and glanced warily at the barn behind her, then at the gun. We heard a shot. What happened? Daryl, frowning, stepped forward. Did that kid try to run? Is anyone hurt? No, but... Carol lowered the gun and explained. Sophia was playing nearby. Randall called to her. He tried to trick her, lied to her, asked the child to help untie his rope so he could get away. Everyone's faces changed. And then? Rick pressed. Did he get away? He's dead. What? The shock rippled through the group. Dead? Dale echoed in disbelief. You killed him? Carol nodded, as if this settled it. She looked at Rick, puzzled that anyone would be surprised. Didn't you decide to take him out at the meeting? She asked. I was going to tell Morales to get ready, but I saw him trying to use Sophia to escape. He was going to die anyway, so I took care of it and saved everyone another trip. Silence fell. They stared at Carol, who still looked a little dazed. Finally, Rick exhaled and put a hand on Morales' shoulder. "Take care of the body." The crowd began to disperse. Rick opened his mouth as if to say something more to Dale, but the old man had already turned and walked away. Rick's chest tightened. He moved as if to follow, to explain, to argue. A hand on his arm stopped him. "Don't go, Rick," Carol said softly, watching Dale's retreating figure. "Give him space. You can't make him change his mind. He has to figure it out himself. He'll have to come to terms with it sooner or later, like the rest of us." Rick met Carol's hard, emotionless gaze, paused, and reluctantly let his step fall back. He sighed without sound. Across the camp, Amy started toward Dale, wanting to offer comfort, but Dale raised a hand to stop her. "I'm fine," he said. He lowered his head and kept his face turned away. "I just want to walk alone." He walked to the fence at the edge of the camp. The meadow stretched out in sunlight. Children played on the grass, apparently untroubled by the gunshot, chasing each other in the golden light. Dale watched them and felt a bitter ache swell up inside. "Children growing up in this time," he muttered. "What will their future be like? Will they have to end up like us, hands stained with blood, forced to abandon what matters just to survive? No matter what comes, at least they have a chance to grow up. Maybe that's something." A calm voice came from a nearby fence post. Dale turned and saw Louis sitting there, also watching the children. "Louis?" Dale managed a weak smile. "Why are you here? I've been here the whole time." Louis brushed his hands on his pants, as if brushing off grass. "I saw what happened and heard you arguing." Dale sighed and looked back to the meadow. "So even you think I'm wrong? In this new world, does survival mean nothing else matters? Have humanity and basic decency become burdens?" "No, Grandpa Dale." Louis turned and leaned against the fence, looking at him seriously. "It's the opposite. We agree with what you believe because we value life and want to protect humanity. We made that decision." 136. Problem solved. Dale looked at him in confusion. "You think Randall is a poor soul forced by circumstance, some victim who lost his way?" Louis answered crisply. "But if he really were as innocent as you think, he wouldn't be so trusted in that group. He knows where the camp is, the guard rotations, and how to use information to bargain. A marginalized victim wouldn't know so many secrets or be sent out on such an important scouting mission. Only someone who has truly integrated with them and enjoyed their protection and benefits would have that knowledge. He may not have killed anyone with his own hands, but he's not an innocent bystander." Dale's brow relaxed a little, reflection passing through his eyes. "No matter the era, we can't lose our moral baseline as human beings." Louis changed the subject, his tone suddenly very serious. "Times have changed, and the people we face have changed, so the standards of that baseline have to change too. If we apply the same standard to enemies who want to kill us as we do to companions who fight to protect us." He paused, choosing his words slowly. "Then the standard itself becomes the greatest injustice to the good people." Dale opened his mouth as if to retort, but couldn't find the words. "Tolerance and understanding are not inherently wrong." Louis met his eyes and said the crucial sentence plainly, "But in this era, they're conditional. The condition is that we must be able to bear the consequences of a misjudgment. If we let him go and we're wrong, if he really is a demon who brings people back to kill us and Carl or Sophia die," he looked straight at Dale. "Can we bear those consequences? Can you?" Dale fell silent. He glanced toward Sophia in the distance, his body trembling slightly. "We can't." "But," his voice was rough, "Rick said we can't go back." "He's right. The old world is dead. We can't go back." Louis nodded. "But we still have a future. As long as we survive, there will be a day when we rebuild order and restore civilization. And to get there, we have to sacrifice things." Dale flinched at the word. "Sacrifice what? Our humanity?" he asked, pained. "No, it's surrendering our right to only do what's purely right." Louis looked at the old man. "In the past, we could afford to act only with kindness and righteousness. That was a right afforded by civilization. In the apocalypse, such a perfect choice is a luxury. To keep everyone alive, sometimes we have to give up that personal purity and do things that are cruel but necessary." His tone was calm, leaving Dale no room to dodge. Only when there are fewer men like Randall will those with true consciences have a better chance of surviving. If you let him go now, you might satisfy your own conscience. But how do you know he won't harm other innocent people to survive? If he escapes and hurts others, whose sin will that be? Dale stared blankly at Lewis, visibly moved. So Rick dealing with him now isn't just for our sake. Louis delivered his final point solemnly. It's even more for the innocent people who might die by his hands in the future. When the day comes that we're strong enough not to fear threats, strong enough to allow mistakes and fix them. He smiled, a trace of hope in it. Only then will we be qualified to talk about giving an enemy a second chance. Night fell. A dim yellow light glowed in the farm kitchen. When Dale and Louis entered, the group talking in low voices fell silent at once. The air froze as everyone looked at Dale awkwardly, unsure how to break the tension. Rick opened his mouth, seeming to want to explain or apologize, but the words felt hollow before he could get them out. He cleared his throat. Herschel finally broke the silence. The stubborn old farmer, who had wrestled with morality and survival himself, didn't bring up the day's subject. He picked up an empty cup and gently pushed it toward the empty seat opposite him. Dale. His tone was gentle. While I don't advocate drinking, would you like a glass tonight? Dale looked at the cup and hesitated for a few seconds. He didn't move right away. His gaze swept the table. Rick, Shane, Andrea. Then he let out a soft sigh. If it's that low-quality whiskey from last time, forget it. He hung his hat on the rack and pulled out a chair. The old man's face showed the wariness of compromise and the helplessness of trying to understand the new world. Tonight, pour me something good. A ripple of relieved, suppressed chuckles ran through the room. Though the atmosphere remained a little strained, the suffocating tension dissolved. Louis stood in the shadows, leaning against the wall, watching with the hint of a smile. He knew Dale hadn't completely let go. This stubborn man still mourned the lost moral baseline. But faced with firm opposition from the whole group, coupled with the painful lesson of helping a woman who turned on them, he was beginning to accept the rules of this new world. For Dale, that was a remarkable step forward. Thank you. The words seemed both genuine and heavy. Just as Louis was about to turn and leave, a soft voice sounded beside him. He looked down to find Amy had come up behind him with 2 plates in her hands. Thank me for what? He asked, one eyebrow raised. I saw it. Amy smiled gently, her eyes shifting to Dale clinking glasses with Herschel. This afternoon I saw you talking to Dale by the fence. Even though I didn't hear what you said, I know it must be because of you he was willing to come in and sit down. She looked at Louis with gratitude. Thank you, Louis. This matters to him, and to all of us. I didn't say much. Grandpa Dale figured it out himself. Louis gave a helpless smile, refusing credit. Watching Amy move off to hand out food, he shrugged inwardly. It was for the best. Though Dale's values hadn't fully upgraded, he still held to a morality that seemed old-fashioned in the apocalypse. Once everyone settled, that morality would serve as an anchor. A group can't be all judges or all fighters. It needs gentler people too. As long as Dale controlled himself and didn't show misplaced kindness at the wrong times, keeping him was more helpful than harmful. All right, the problem here is solved. Louis breathed a small sigh of relief, and while no one was paying attention, slipped out of the busy dining room and back up to the quiet guest room on the 2nd floor. With everyone's worries eased, it was time to deal with a more important matter. He locked the door, dragged a heavy leather suitcase from the depths of his backpack, and calmed himself before pulling out his tools. Let me see. He stared at the suitcase for a long moment. I wonder if this fuel will be enough to pry open this door of yours this time. 137. Connect again. Louis ran the last few days' harvest through his head. If his reading of the 3 was right, his current reserves should be more than enough. The auto repair shop leader fried by 8, the gang of thugs cut down in the shootout, and Randall, executed by Carol with a single shot in the barn, amounted to a substantial intake. It was odd, though, that the dead voices weren't as clear as before. Maybe they had died too cleanly this time, without generating much resentment. He muttered the thought away. This was not the time for theory. Louis no longer hesitated. He flicked his 26 and intoned the chant with practiced ease. Revealing spell. The leather of the case's inner wall rippled like water. Louis's eyes went wide. The silver line of script reappeared. But the light this time was far dimmer than when he had opened it at the factory. It wavered, an unstable flicker like a bulb low on power that could go out at any moment. How could this be, he thought? Was the fuel he'd gathered inferior? Or maybe raw death wasn't the only factor. At the auto repair shop, the fight had ended quickly. The thugs had gone without much feeling. At the factory, people had broken mentally, had their faith collapse, had suffered terror before dying. There had been far more emotional turbulence. Could the case be feeding not on life, but on the dying person's emotions? Louis filed the idea away as a hypothesis. For now, it remained unproven. The line was lit, however faintly, which meant the passage could be used. No point in hesitating. He dug into a compartment in his backpack and pulled out a stack of letters he'd prepared over the past month. Copies of desperate, carefully phrased pleas for help he'd written in whatever spare moments he had. He'd made many copies because he didn't know whether the other side could receive them or how many would get through. If just one arrived, it would be worth it. "Go," he murmured, and slammed the thick bundle of letters against the glowing script. A faint vibration ran up his hand. His fingertips touched the cold nothingness behind the light. The letters vanished into the mist at the bottom of the case. Louis felt a surge of triumph and quickly pressed down again, ready to send more words while the channel held. Sizzle. Before he could speak, the already weak silver line flared and then went out. Instantly, the heavy lid of the leather case snapped down with a thunderous bang, as if an invisible giant had slammed it shut. Louis jerked his hand back, heart pounding. Silence flooded the room. The case sat there, ordinary and closed, and fear lodged in his throat. Just like that? Not even time for a single sentence? He swallowed hard, unlatched the case with trembling fingers, and lifted the lid. The silver script was gone. At the bottom lay only a dark, charcoal-like mass. What is this? Meanwhile, Hogwarts Castle, an abandoned girl's bathroom on the second floor. A potion bubbled and hissed in the cramped stall, the air heavy with the sour, rotting cabbage smell of overheated herbs. Harry, Ron, and Hermione were squeezed around the cauldron. The leather case lay at Harry's feet on the damp tiles. "Harry, I really don't get it," Ron grumbled as he stirred, glancing at the case. "Why have you been hauling that thing around lately? And after it ate all your textbooks last time, you're still putting stuff in it?" "It's because I made mistakes before," Harry said, wiping fog off his glasses. "The case lit up so fast that I only had time to throw in the textbooks I had. Those probably did nothing but start a fire. So I put in food and some 21 Wes ahead of time. In case the person on the other side asks for help again, they'll be able to get things that actually save them." "Harry." Hermione popped her head out from the steam, brows drawn. "I don't mean to discourage you, but you should listen to people who know the rules. Remember when we tried to ask Headmaster Dumbledore about this and bumped into others 7 times in the corridor?" she continued. "Even though you said a friend had found a magical object and you just wanted to test it, Professor McGonagall was very clear. And Snape." Ron's shoulders hunched at the memory. The look on that old bat's face was like he wanted to swallow you whole. If Professor McGonagall hadn't stepped in, he would have searched you on the spot for contraband. And even Professor Lockhart said, Hermione sighed, "This is probably a typical 9. He claimed those dark arts objects fake cries for help to prey on a Mall 20's compassion and devour the things they put in." "Oh, come off it, Hermione," Ron scoffed. "If Lockhart says that, it's more reason to believe the case is genuine. The man couldn't even handle a few Cornish pixies, and you actually trust his theories?" "Ron," Hermione's face flushed. "You can't say that. Professor Lockhart was just out of his depth that day. He is a recipient of the Order of Merlin, 3rd class, and his books are full of heroic deeds." "Yeah, the Great 5, Ron sneered. "Just stop arguing." Harry cut through the bickering, eyes fixed on the case. He sounded small but steady. "I know it might be a scam. If it's fake, I lose some food and a few 21s. But what if it's real? If someone is trapped in the dark, waiting to be saved, I can't pretend I didn't hear them just because I'm scared of a trick or worried about breaking school rules." 138. Insufficient phone credit. Besides, it's not like I want to keep it a secret forever, Harry said, looking at Hermione. I'm doing research. I want to at least understand the basic mechanics before we decide what to do. Think about it, Hermione warned. If we go to the professors now, Snape will definitely get involved. With the way he treats me, he'll confiscate the chest the moment he sees it and shove it down into the dungeons for some bogus security check, Harry added. If the person on the other end needs help right then and the chest is locked away gathering dust. He let the sentence hang. Hermione sighed, seeing how stubborn he was. Fine, but if you notice anything unusual, you must hand it over immediately. She didn't get to finish. The chest gave a violent jolt. It's glowing. It's glowing again, Ron shouted. Harry's heart hammered as he yanked the lid open. A faint, unstable silver light flickered at the bottom of the chest, like an old bulb with a bad connection. Hello? Can you hear me? Harry called, waving at the supplies he'd shoved inside. Who are you? There's food and medicine in here. Can you take them? Static crackled back, loud and brittle. The connection was fragile. Just as Harry reached in to confirm or to push something else through as a test, puff. The silver light vanished as if someone had blown out a candle. With a loud thud, the lid lost whatever tenuous support it had and slammed shut, nearly crushing Harry's fingers. The cauldron bubbled on in the silence that followed. They all stared at one another, hearts racing, unsure what had just happened. A few seconds later, Harry refused to give up. He unlatched the chest again. Most of the items were still there, except for 2 packaged rations that had been on top. They were gone without a trace. More worrying, a small pinch of grayish-white powder lay on the scattered wrapping paper, smelling strongly of char. This is... Harry's face drained of color as a terrifying thought pushed up in his throat. This isn't ashes, is it? Did whoever's on the other end get burned? Merlin's pants, Ron blurted. They were burned to death? Don't panic. Hermione, though frightened, forced herself to think. She leaned closer and inspected the powder. It shouldn't be human ashes. She ran her fingers through the residue, studying it. It looks more like paper, or some kind of fiber. Relief rippled through the others. Paper? Ron brightened. Maybe they couldn't speak, so they wrote messages and sent them. The paper just got damaged in transit. That sounded plausible to them all. Hermione drew her wand and murmured at the ash. Reparo. There was no effect. The ash stayed ash. It's too fragmented, she said, shaking her head. You can't mend it. Meanwhile, in the other world, Louis frowned at the 2 blackened, oddly charred lumps at the bottom of his chest. He pinched a bit of the residue and sniffed. The smell was oddly sweet and burnt at once, more like scorched sugar or overbaked pastry than human ash. No one on the other side would be bored enough to send me 2 lumps of charcoal, he muttered, brushing the black powder off his hand. They were probably food or supplies, destroyed during the transmission. He closed the chest with a disappointed sigh and sat back on the bed, thinking through why it had failed. Was it simply insufficient energy? He wondered. He rubbed his chin. No, the light did come on, even if it was dim. The door did open. If the door opened, why couldn't the items get through intact? Or why were they destroyed upon arrival? A memory of the chest's riddle flagged another required condition: prayer. The idea clicked into place. His deduction felt right. The embers of destruction were the power source, the fuel that forced the passage open. The prayer was the stabilizing signal that kept the connection clean and the transmission intact. This time, he'd scraped together just enough embers to force the door to crack, but no strong prayer to hold it steady. It was like turning on a circuit with unstable voltage. The power is there, but a surge fries everything that tries to pass. I can't just hoard fuel blindly, Louis told himself. Those 2 conditions have to be balanced. Now that he understood the mechanism, he couldn't afford to be casual about opening the chest. He couldn't squander resources the next time he had a little stock. He had to wait until both the energy and the signal were strong enough. Otherwise, the line would cut off mid-transmission if the embers were low, and if the prayer wasn't enough, the items would be destroyed. Either way, precious supplies would be wasted. He shook his head. Though some of the letters had been lost this time, at least he had learned part of the rule. He shoved the chest into the dark of his backpack under the bed. Next time, I'll wait for the right moment. Over the next 2 days, the farm buzzed with activity again. After dealing with the Philadelphia bandits and rescuing their companions, Rick decided the whole group should move to the prison. Herschel's family joined the migration as well. The old man had been stubborn about leaving the farm he'd run for years, but after the barn incident and repeated persuasion from Rick, Maggie, and the others, Herschel relented. Beneath this surface of hope, though, a darker undercurrent ran: Shane. In the original timeline, this was the point where Shane's psychological defenses finally cracked. Laurie's coldness, Otis's death, and the complication of Laurie's pregnancy pushed him step by step toward catastrophe. Lewis's interventions had prevented many of those tragedies, but he could still sense that something in Shane was off. Maybe Shane already knew about Laurie's pregnancy. The baby in Laurie's womb and the messy entanglements between them hung over the group like a ticking time bomb. In the original story, that bomb eventually destroyed the bond between the two friends and drove Shane to his end. I have to find a way to defuse that fuse, Louis thought, and as if on cue, the perfect opportunity finally presented itself. 139. Talk therapy. That evening, Louis was organizing supplies on the barn's second floor when a set of footsteps approached. Shane came up alone, holding 2 bars of chocolate. He tossed one to Louis. "Catch." Louis did. "Thanks." Shane didn't say anything else at first. He sat on a haystack with one leg hanging off the edge and looked out at the moonlit window. Then he sighed, almost to himself. "You think this feels a bit like the first time we met? Back at the office building, I gave you one of these too, though the flavor wasn't as good." "Yeah." Louis smiled, tore open the wrapper, and took a bite. "And downstairs right now there aren't any walkers waiting for a meal." "Everything's getting better, huh?" "Maybe." Shane turned his head and watched Louis from the shadow. After a moment of silence, he shifted the subject. "Louis, what do you think of us?" "What do you mean?" "I mean Rick, me, and Laurie," Shane said, listing the names as if testing the weight of them. "Do you think we're trustworthy?" "Of course." Louis nodded without hesitation, then cocked his head in confusion at why Shane would even ask. A complex smile flickered across Shane's mouth. "I'm not trying to interrogate you, kid." Shane sighed, not angrily, more helplessly. "But sometimes you do stand out." Louis still looked puzzled, so Shane tried to be clear. "For example, your accent. You sound like you grew up in Britain, but you also seem to know too much about around here. Like the layout of Atlanta." Shane stared into Louis's eyes and spoke slowly. "Rick told me the reason you're so familiar with Atlanta, knowing those back alleys and shortcuts, is that you attended a summer camp there." Louis watched Shane's expression. Confusion remained on his face, but his mind was already racing. "As far as I know, the kind of high-end summer camp that teaches kids detailed geography and wilderness survival isn't cheap," Shane continued. "And those camps usually aren't in the city. They're up in the Blue Ridge Mountains or in the forests by Lake Lanier. Nobody would take a group of kids to downtown Atlanta to teach urban cover or how to navigate riot zones. No insurance company would allow that. Urban survival training is usually for reserve recruits, police explorers, and the like." He paused, letting it hang, his gaze still fixed on Louis. He seemed like he wanted to say more, then shook his head. "Forget it. None of that matters." A flash of realization crossed Louis's face. He understood what Shane was getting at. He'd made a basic assumption. Wilderness survival and urban survival are different skill sets. If he'd really been an unwanted orphan, he might have ended up in one of those harsh wilderness therapy programs that teach survival, but not how to move through an urban sprawl. Or maybe he'd never been to any camp at all, and his knowledge came from somewhere else, something like the special projects Shane had hinted at. Louis felt the sting of being inadvertently exposed so early. He'd tried so hard to be careful, but living with them day and night made hiding anomalies impossible. Rick and Shane had noticed things and kept quiet, chalking it up to him being a precocious kid with a complicated past. Louis had hoped to use that misinterpretation to smooth things over. Seeing Louis remain silent, Shane relaxed and let his expression soften. "Hey, kid, relax." He leaned forward and spoke with uncommon sincerity. "I'm not trying to pry into your secrets, and I don't care exactly where you learned those skills. Whether it was juvenile detention or anywhere else, it doesn't matter." He pointed from Louis to himself and kept his voice low. I know you're different from other kids. You know a lot, sometimes more than adults. Maybe in your old life that made things hard. He chose his next words carefully, aiming to steer Louis gently. You're always trying to prove your value, wanting to help, to be useful. Even when things are dangerous, you're the first to step forward. Maybe you think if you're useful enough, if you never cause trouble, we won't abandon you like your previous family did. But Louis, you're wrong. Shane said each word on purpose. You're not alone anymore. You don't have to always act tough or trade your safety for a place here. No matter what happened before, none of that matters. You're one of us. Trust us a little more. Louis stared at Shane, mouth slightly open, struck by the confession. He didn't answer at once, only exhaled softly. Those always tense shoulders seemed to drop with the breath, as if he'd finally let something go. After a moment, Louis lowered his eyes and then looked up with an expression that said he'd decided to tell it all. You're right, Uncle Shane, he said quietly, looking off as if into a distant memory. At first, my life wasn't what I said. When my uncle and aunt first took me in, they were very good to me. They thought they couldn't have kids, so they treated me like their own son. You could even say they spoiled me. Whatever I was interested in, those expensive wilderness camps you mentioned, or going to study maps and explore Atlanta, no matter how much it cost or how strange it seemed, they supported me. Whenever I learned something new and showed it off, they'd pick me up and call me an explorer, a genius. Louis paused, a faint bitterness at the corner of his mouth. For a while, I really thought I had a home again. But that only lasted until they had a child. Shane's fingers tightened on the chocolate bar. That was their miracle. For me, it was the beginning of everything changing. 140, reverse talk therapy. Louis's voice was steady, as if he were telling someone else's story. From that day on, the talent that once made them proud turned overnight into the reason they were afraid of me. They started watching me, worried I'd use my cleverness to steal even the smallest thing belonging to their biological Thor. But I never thought about stealing anything, he sighed. At the time, I was honestly happy that I might have a younger brother or sister. But once, when I only wanted to get closer to see the baby in the cradle, my aunt screamed and shoved me away. The look in her eyes, she treated me like a demon trying to hurt an infant. I tried so hard to be better, to tell them I wasn't an outsider, that I loved that for too. But the more I tried, the more they said I was pretending, more hypocritical than before. Shane listened in silence. His breathing had quickened and his eyes had gone blank, as if he were watching a parallel life through Louis's words. What happened after that? He asked, voice rougher than usual. Later, I figured it out. Louis shrugged, relief softening his tone. When the disaster broke out and they were packing to leave, I actually saw it. There was no room for me in their car. But I didn't follow them. Why? Because I knew a family forced together like that was doomed. As long as I was there, they'd always be on edge, and that four would never get wholehearted love. Louis looked at Shane seriously. Instead of everyone suffering later, it's better we separate now. At least that way I keep the memory of when they were good to me, and that truly innocent four can have a home without barriers. Shane didn't answer. He opened his mouth, his Adam's apple bobbing as if he wanted to argue against that self-sacrifice, or simply let something out, but the words stalled. He turned his head and stared through the second-story window toward the camp. A fire burned there. Carol and the others were busy with dinner. Warm yellow flames danced in the night, and the faint sounds of children playing drifted across the yard. Moonlight caught the planes of his face, casting shifting shadows. His hand tightened on his knee until the knuckles paled, even his jaw clenched. For a long time he sat in that stillness. When he finally closed his eyes, it was as if he were trying to sever the scene from his head, forcing himself to accept an unpleasant truth alone. When he opened them again, his expression had cleared somewhat. He breathed out into the cold air, a cloud of white mist vanishing into the night. You're a good kid, Louis. He stood, came over, and pressed a heavy hand onto Louis's shoulder. Better than a lot of adults. You always have been. No more was said. Shane moved to the edge of the platform, gripped the wooden ladder and climbed down. The ladder creaked as he disappeared into the dark under the loft. Louis stayed sitting on the high haystack, watching the moon beyond the window. Only after he was sure Shane was gone did Louis relax, letting his tense posture collapse into the soft hay. "That should have done the trick, right?" Louis muttered. Judging by Shane's reaction, the words had landed. Probably, right now, Shane was using the night to chew on the revelation, thinking about how to handle his future with that family. Louis didn't know how long the effect would last, but he felt cautiously optimistic. The situation here was fundamentally different from the original timeline. Back then, Shane and Rick had clashed not just emotionally, but over survival philosophy. Shane's insecurity made him think Rick's mercy would get them killed. Now, with Louis having nudged things, the group's survival pressure was lower, and Rick had proven himself tough and decisive in battle. Shane still trusted Rick as a leader and a brother. Hopefully, he'd come around. The night wind slipped through the barn's cracks and carried Louis's thoughts back to the story he'd just told. The tale was made up, but the suffocating wish to escape had been real. In his past life, on the day he was born, a fire burned his parents alive. He was pulled out by a firefighter and spent a short childhood in an orphanage before being abducted by traffickers and taken to the mountains. The family he later called parents hadn't sent him to summer camp. They tried to brainwash him, to make him forget the world outside and accept them as his true family. He remembered waking up every morning to push open the window and see nothing but that sunless, endless mountain. All he could think was that he wanted wings to fly out of that cage. A middle-aged photographer who came to photograph the scenery found him and tried to help him escape, but villagers who had been watching ambushed them at the village entrance. To cover their crime, they branded the photographer a burglar, a pervert trying to kidnap a four. They beat him to death right in front of Louis. He screamed the truth, but no one believed him. Years later, 12-year-old Louis finally ran. Back in society, he used his status as an abducted four and the scars on his body to draw attention. He guided media conversations, exposed the trafficking, and forced the bloody truth into public view. The photographer's name was cleared, the traffickers punished. Louis sent all the compensation and donations he received anonymously to the photographer's family. With state support and kindness from strangers, he returned to school. Despite lost years, he clawed his way into university. Looking at his hands in the moonlight, Louis thought about how that twisted past had shown him the worst of people early on, but he'd never become cynical. Maybe it was because after that, he met so much goodness, the patient teacher who tutored him, friends who looked out for him, the small mercies from strangers. That warmth pulled him out of that dark gully and let him grow into a cheerful, ordinary person. Even catching the end of the world shortly after transmigrating felt, in retrospect, not so bad. He had a six to protect him, a group of imperfect but reliable partners, and they were facing walkers, the least mobile, least destructive threat. Anyway, life isn't bad right now. Louis exhaled, letting those heavy pasts leave his chest with the cloud of breath. So let's live well. Hey. Daryl stood at the bottom of the ladder, one hand on a beam, looking up. The two is roasted. Everyone's waiting to eat. He jabbed his chin up toward the hayloft and grumbled, "It's not easy finding you in this dump. Why hide so high? You hatching an egg?" "Coming." Louis shook himself out of his reverie, slung the heavy leather suitcase over his shoulder, and climbed down. Daryl didn't move right away. He sized Louis up with that inquisitive, half-suspicious look he always wore. "Saw Shane a minute ago," Daryl said, shouldering his crossbow. "That guy had a weird look when he came out, just sat there in a daze." "What'd you say to him?" Louis asked as he matched Daryl's stride. "Nothing." Louis shrugged, keeping his tone light. "Just a casual chat, reminiscing about the past."